How important do you think? Well, hello, Tim. How are you?
Hi, Zach. How are you?
Great. How important do you think like consistency in a brand is? We were just talking about how we always kind of wear like very similar clothes. Usually, you're wearing like a Tesla or the
I go
SpaceX
SpaceX,
shirt.
man. I feel like that's my part. That I have to support them. A lot of launches seem to happen on Thursdays, so I support them as much as I can. I feel like
Do you,
from
do you
a
think people associate you for the clothes that you wear?
I don't know. I've never thought about it.
So I actually branded myself to like the jeans and t-shirt type of thing way back when. So I feel like people actually did. I mean, I would vocally say that type of thing. I think that's
Yeah.
an important aspect of it. And I don't know. I feel like people have to be very cognizant of what they want people to think about. And a lot of times because of looks, I guess they, for whatever reason, I don't know the reason, but they start to associate things like that. You know, bankers wear suits, you know, your financial people wear suits, whatever. It's very, I don't know, but people definitely associate me. They're like, oh, are you wearing jeans and a t-shirt? And then obviously when I became the president of the jean jacket movement, that started it too. But is that ridiculous to think?
No, I mean it's yeah. I just never really stopped to pay attention or to even think about what someone may think about me. I guess I'm just always going forward, and I don't know. I suppose some people have thought that I've worked for Tesla just in the sense that I've wear so much of their apparel, but.
But to transition this crazy conversation to a very important one, I think it's, you know, the brands that we associate ourselves with are incredibly important. And like you said, Tim, maybe a lot of people don't think of it that kind of way. So we are delighted to not have to spell out today's guest company name because, well, that would be like Mississippi. It would just be way too hard. Allison, how are you?
Hey guys, I'm good. I know I picked a difficult name, but there's
Scroobious.
meaning behind it.
It's Scroobious. Did I get it right?
Scroobious, you got it.
I'm done. I'm leaving. You guys have a wonderful day. I have nothing else to achieve today.
See, the cool thing though, you'll remember it.
I will, but from a branding perspective, from a business perspective, from a wording perspective, how challenging is it that you have a name that a lot of people probably cannot pronounce, write out, etc. Things on that. Is that something you've seen as a difficult thing?
You know, it can be challenging, and I know it can make people feel a little uneasy when they don't know how to pronounce it, but it ends up being a pretty net positive because I get asked, where does the name come from? And as a mission-driven founder, there is meaning behind the name, and I get to tell that story, and then people remember it because it is so different, and it makes you smile, and that's a lot of our brand is making people feel good and infusing humor. So it works for our brand.
A good icebreaker.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, with that, did you buy any various spellings for your for the URLs, or are you just banking on the fact everyone's going to get it right the first time?
No, oh my gosh. I mean, are you really an entrepreneur if you don't own like 10 different domains? I'm probably on the low side of domain. No, I've got a bunch of them because it is misspelled. It actually comes from a poem. There's a published poem called the Scroobious Pip. But there is also, funnily enough, a rapper named the Scroobious Pip who spells it incorrectly, but spells it the way that most people would think to spell it. So he has that domain. But the other cool thing is a lot of people think it stands for Scroobious, and we're all about promoting diversity. So it works in that way too.
Do you like the rapper's music? I mean, could he, create the jingle for you, or she? Like, is there an opportunity there for DJ Scroobious to come on out to Team Scroobious? Like, is that what we're about to see?
I never thought about reaching out to him, but maybe I'll give his music a listen and see.
There you go.
Very good. Sounds like a solid plan for an offsite.
There you go. So one thing that's interesting about the world that you live in and create a business about is, I think most people maybe just generally think that this is a thing that happens, but then when you actually read the number of 2% of 2% of VC-backed only 2% of, I'm gonna screw up the stat, but only 2% of VC-backed businesses are females and minorities. It's something like that. And then when you hear that, you're like, wow, that's pretty insane. Like, where does that data come from? Like, it just, it almost seems like it's not believable. It's so low, but it is. It's, I mean, that's the
Yeah,
truth.
it's devastatingly low. So it's 2% of VC dollars go to women founders. And it's only, talk about low, it's 0.67% of VC dollars go to Black women. So if you're a woman of color, it is almost statistically impossible for you to get VC funding. And when you have that kind of data, which is well established and many times published, you can Google it and find lots of sources for this. It is, a systemic issue. It is not at all the case, and it would be, not even mathematically sound to think that only 2% of women are investable or creating investable companies. So it's an indication that there is a system problem, and that's where there's a big opportunity to change or come up with innovations that direct capital from different sources and in different ways to address that issue, which indicates an enormous opportunity, right? That's the other way to look at it, is all of those people who are not getting VC funding have unbelievably strong ideas and execution leadership to create wealth for those who will put capital toward them.
What do you think the reason is behind that lopsided number? Is it just people fund, or people run in the same circles and they fund people that look like them, that they don't do it with purpose in terms of highlighting diversity? I'm just curious what your take is.
So it's a multifaceted question, right? There is a lot that goes into that number, and there are a lot of systemic bias issues that lead to who ends up in positions of power. So, you can look at almost any business or technology aspect, and women are not represented and people of color are not represented in equal distribution to those who would be traditionally in those roles, which is due to, generations of systemic bias. But in terms of venture funding, I think it's still 98%. I could be wrong on that statistic, but it's in the 90s% of check writers and partners at venture funds are white men. And there is a very strong psychological principle called in-group bias, where you tend to see people who are more like you as more competent. And therefore you direct your resources toward those people that you view as competent at what they are doing. And it also has to do with your networks. We also tend to know people who are like us. Those are our circles. And for an industry like venture, which relies extremely heavily on networks and referrals and warm introductions, overwhelmingly, those are going to also be white men, because that's who the check writers are.
I know growing up, it seemed that, and maybe this is a crazy parallel, but growing up, it seemed like, guys did guys things, girls did girls things, right? And so women in tech was something that wasn't really pushed the way that I think that it is now. Does that have a big play into it as to maybe why some of that stuff's there? And because now women in tech is something that's being pushed so much, or encouraged, that we're going to see that sway? Or, I mean, do you think because there was so gender pushed things, guys drive cars, girls do home ec type of thing, as ridiculous as a statement that is, I mean, I feel like that's kind of the things that were pushed way back when, guys go to shop class, girls play with Barbies. I mean, are we seeing the full swing of that? Like, I don't know. Is that a crazy parallel? I mean, is that a crazy parallel? I mean, that's just...
No, it all feeds into it. It's why it's such a sticky question. right? So for sure, what you experience when you're younger influences how you perceive yourself and what you're capable of and what you should be doing, right? So I remember in the days of gym class where the boys were playing hockey and the girls had, step aerobics or, something ridiculous. Totally remember that, right? But there's so many other elements at play. And if we're just kind of focusing on the women in tech aspect, it is a strong hiring bias. So just like a funding bias, there's a hiring bias because management and senior leadership is still overwhelmingly white men in tech companies. And I can share, with you, I didn't talk about this until basically last year, and I've been more vocal and have heard so many stories relating to it. I was forced out of my job when I returned from maternity leave with my first child. And there are still, that was a long time ago now, but there are still those types of practices in tech companies where they're able to make it impossible for a new mother or, someone returning from leave to stay in that senior tech role. And that impacts the whole rest of that person's career. And I call it the mom tax. It impacted my career when I had a period where I was at home with children and I missed out on some critical network and relationship building parts of my journey, that didn't impact the other men who got to go back to, never had to take a leave and go back. And they just, so that's just one element of it. There's so many other factors at play that lead to these inequities and discrepancies. But, the good news today is people are being more vocal about it. There are easier ways to create impactful technology platforms to address some of these inequities. And in terms of, just getting back to kind of startups and entrepreneurship, a lot of women and moms in particular are turning to entrepreneurship, and they're able to capitalize their companies from sources other than venture. So we're seeing a big push for capital coming from different places, which is very, encouraging.
What do you mean capital from different places?
So angel investors are very quickly growing. That's just individuals who are funding companies, right? I became an angel investor this year, and that's not venture. It's very different from a fund that has
got it.
Limited partners behind it and, bureaucracy and all those things. So angel investors are becoming a much bigger open source of capital. And then crowdfunding has also exploded just in the past few years, really. We've seen increased or easier regulations for people to be able to fund through a crowdfunding portal. And that's also been providing capital to startups that would otherwise struggle to raise from venture.
Yeah, I agree with that. Just in the sense of if you look at the traditional VC vehicles that are out there or organizations, it just seems like so many of these quote unquote older white guys, I mean, they're just up in their office, and it takes several meetings to even meet with any of these decision makers. So like the researchers or the associates that are fielding these companies and sourcing these companies, I mean, it just the time that it takes to reach to a decision maker, they're just so out of touch with everything that happens that it's really, really difficult for anyone to surface through, let alone if you are female or of color. So these individual investors and angels, I mean, I learned real early not to discount anybody or their ability to execute on an idea, let alone one that they're very passionate about, a passionate problem that they're solving. So I certainly agree that the individual angel aspect is something that's going to move the playing field forward.
Yeah, no, it's enormous. I mean, people don't realize there are more than 4 million actively investing angels just in the US. And that's an undercount because many angels, you don't know that they're angel investing. It's not public information. And people don't realize, it could be your doctor, it could be your coworker. You don't know who's angel investing. And they're able to see opportunities that VCs don't see for, whatever reason, whether it's bias or whether it's the way their fund is structured and, how they're building a portfolio. And they are a much more approachable source of capital. The issue now, and this is part of what we're doing at Scroobious, is how do you try to condense this fragmented market? Because, right, it's millions of just people, of individuals. So how can we leverage data and a platform that scales to help angels find these opportunities that they want to put their money behind? And how do we help them find other angels that they may not know, that are not in their region or not in their social groups, who are very aligned with them, so they can pool their money, their capital, to get more into the hands of these startups?
I'm curious. So we've set the stage. I'm curious, what happened, or how did you come up with wanting to start Scroobious? What's some of the background? Let's just start with the background, and then we can jump forward in terms of what the response was once you started.
Yeah, I can tell you the origin story for the company. So I founded Scroobious 2 years ago, literally right before COVID showed up, like the worst time to incorporate a company. But before Scroobious, I had launched and co-run a medical device startup that was spun out of MIT. Here I'm in Boston, where I did our fundraising. So we raised almost $10 million over the course of 5 years, and then that company was acquired. But for me, what was very defining about the experience was the gender bias that I went through in the fundraising process. And I'm quite used to gender bias. We already talked about how I, was even forced out of a tech operator role, and that I'm used to that. But in the fundraising process, it was so much more overt. I was not prepared for it. And I spent a long time researching the space of fundraising and pitching itself to understand if my experience was typical or not. And that's when you very quickly find those devastating numbers about who gets funding. So for me, coming from tech as my background in market research and consumer behavior, and having gone through firsthand being a female founder fundraising, I knew that there was this great need and opportunity to create a tech innovation, a data-driven innovation to address this issue.
And then so then you incorporate, and then what's your response when you start talking to the public, saying this is what we're doing, this is what our mission is? Did people embrace that? Did some people roll their eyes? What was the response?
So there's different responses from different people. Overall, it has been an incredibly welcoming environment. But I'm also, purposely aligning the company with organizations that do care about diversity in the startup ecosystem and do see the undervalued asset class that overlooked founders represent. This is where there is room to earn substantial returns and generate alpha when you have an undervalued asset class. So we we launched our own MVP, our minimal viable product, a year ago, and we've worked with over 300 founders. I've not spent $1 on sales or marketing. So the demand alone indicates just the intense need and interest and support of what we're doing, and our community has been fantastic. But there's plenty of VCs that I pitched myself in this, company. I've raised an angel round that don't believe the numbers or don't believe that it's as big a problem as it is. And I've had some pretty uncomfortable and upsetting conversations. I'm just at a point in my own trajectory where I say, okay, we're not a good match for each other. Let's move on. But that's really difficult for most people to not let it sink deeper.
So we've had several guests on the show that say that they agree with everything that you're saying, that there's absolutely a problem, that they are trying to fix it, and then that they'll associate themselves with these groups who say that they want to fix it, and then they're just jibber jabber. They just mm-hmm. talk. And it's interesting to hear that, because they then associate themselves to try to fix this thing with these people who say that they are trying to fix it, and there's no needle moving, if you will. Like, how does one vet a group or an individual that they are actually walking their talk and not just saying that they think it's a problem and doing nothing about it?
Yeah, it's a huge problem. And one of the, again, more difficult pieces of data that's come out over the past couple of years is that there's been a large increase in the meetings that women and minority founders have been getting with influential people and with check writers, but actually a decrease in the checks being written. So people are doing what you just said. They're taking meetings and feeling like they are doing something, but that's not doing anything but wasting somebody's time who doesn't have it to waste. So that is a big deal. And then we've also seen a number of accelerator programs for founders. It's exploded, and a lot of them are predatory, and they're not, it's in that same vein of espousing, supporting these principles of these founders, but not actually doing it. So, my guidance for how do you know?
So just checking off a box, basically saying, hey, we are diverse, but just to be diverse and not doing anything from it.
Right. And not putting real dollars or real time or real effort behind it. It's, that's not helpful. That's not what people need. And these other folks, then feel good about themselves. They're like, oh, well, I took a meeting with, 4 Black founders today. Like, great. Did you invest in any of them? No, but I've been filling my calendar. That's meaningless for the.
Is there a rebuttal
founders.
that they're not investable? Is there a rebuttal that they're not investable in that case? Like, what would they say is the reason why they're not then funding them in that case? Or any of these individuals?
There's any number of reasons. For investors, particularly fund managers, so people that work at an institutional fund, they are not incentivized to share the true reason for passing on a deal. And some of it, not all of it, is bad natured. Some of it is that investors may want to engage when the startup is at a later stage and they don't want to burn any bridges. They want to be able to stay in the game. So they'll usually say, oh, it's just too early, or some other kind of very vague reason. You don't often get the real reason why somebody passed. And a lot of the time it is team or team experience, where they'll say, oh, well, this, these team members haven't worked together in the past before and it's too risky, or this team member doesn't have enough management experience and it's too risky. But the issue with that is it's not actually seeing the potential of execution of the company, and it's perpetuating this cycle of bias because women and minorities are less likely to have been given those experiences to begin with. So the pool of people who meet this, narrow criteria, it just shrinks along with it, and you end up with this more homogenous group that you deem as more investable based on that criteria.
I would love to know on your end, do you track this data in terms of, with all that you're working with, you said 300 founders already. It would be awesome if you track the data in terms of, we've pitched to these are the companies that we've pitched to, these are the excuses, these are the ones that actually funded, and then have your own list of these companies or these individuals have been the most diverse in terms of funding the companies that we work with. Do you do that at all?
So I plan to. My job is very meta because I work with startups all day long, but also I am a startup, and
right.
We just released our own V1, our first custom platform, like a couple months ago. So working toward that, but yeah, a lot of what we are going to do, what of the data that's going into this, is to lend transparency. So I'm particularly focused on angel investors. I don't think that, kind of fixing VC is going to get more checks to the founders that we work with. I think that angel investors is a better source of capital for it, or crowdfunding portals as well. And we're building in data that will show both the founder and the investor for themselves what type of material they're engaging with, so that they can get a sense and see with more clarity if they are biased towards certain demographics or segments versus the average user on the platform.
What have you found in terms of the with the people that you've worked with? Is there have you identified anything that as a strength or an opportunity to strengthen founders that they've been missing? Terribly worded question, but I'm just curious, like what you have found. I mean, because like, does that make sense?
Let me ask the question differently. Yeah. So Tim and I have worked with probably 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, no joke, companies over the last decade, right? A lot of times you can tell when one is going to be successful or not just by having a conversation with them, right? My guess is you potentially have seen this as well in many of the companies. Like, is there a trend from a positive standpoint that these companies are, that you're seeing with that? Maybe a negative side of it that they tend to have, that they can that there's an opportunity from? Like, what are some of the strengths and weaknesses that you're seeing in this kind of world? Because sometimes you can just tell that a company maybe isn't going to be successful, and I don't think that has anything to do with diversity. I think that has to do with maybe they just aren't ready yet to see that, and then there's an opportunity there as well. I don't know if it helps your question, Tim, but trying.
Yeah, I mean, I understand your point, and you know, there is some intuition there, or some benefits of having worked with a large set so that you can see patterns and signals, you know, that others might not see without the benefit of working with that large set. It is difficult to parse out, though, saying it doesn't have to do with diversity. And, you know, again, a lot of the times this isn't ill or bad will, it's just a lack of transparency into your own systems or ways that the signals that you're pulling out to make these evaluations. So, you know, a prime example in fundraising, because that's the world that I play in, is for groups who have been traditionally blocked from entering investor networks. They don't know how to understand what investors are thinking. And they don't get the benefit of seeing other founders interact with them to pick up on the signals that the investors are responding to, because they're blocked, they can't get in. So to then judge that group in the same way you would judge founders who have had access to those networks, it's not a level playing field, right? You can't look at the same signals. It's not the right measure of potential or of capability of execution. So, you know, it's easy to say, oh, well, it doesn't matter if I had two founders come in and they both were super strong, you know, like I wouldn't even care what their gender was. Fine, but it's ignoring the experience that one has had in understanding how you think, and the lack of experience from the other in understanding how you think. So our, you know, platform, the content that we provide for how you pitch, a lot of it is focused on helping founders understand how investors think, because you can't present compelling material if you don't understand what their mindset is.
Yeah, and I guess I knew the answer that I wanted to hear, which was that was what I was hoping to hear, is just that people just haven't been exposed to the opportunity. You know, that it's not a matter of if they're qualified or not qualified. It's just they either just don't know how, or they've not been shown the way to get the exposure that they need. Yeah, it's just what advice do you give the founders that you're working with, and what advice would you give to the people that are listening to this show in terms of what's the best way to start capturing the attention of those funding sources?
There's lots of advice.
Sure.
You know, I'll start with a couple. And, one, I'm just going to reiterate the importance of understanding the other person's mindset and what they're looking for. So, for investors, whether it's a VC or whether it's an angel, the lens that investors look at pitches through is one of de-risking. And this is not intuitive to founders. They're starting with a negative view, really, where they're trying to take risk away that what you're doing is going to work. So everything you're pitching should be meant to take away risk for the investor versus these big, sometimes you'll see these big grandiose, like, we're the best, we're going to change the world, these huge statements. But that's not taking risk away that the thing you're going to do is going to work. Because the investors, like you both, right, you've seen thousands, you've worked with thousands of entrepreneurs and companies. Well, investors have seen thousands of pitches, right? They get info all the time. They see hundreds a week. So they do have that other view, and you're in that context, and they're constantly trying to say, what's the least risky that I'll make a return on my money? And so that's just a really important thing for founders to understand when they're talking to investors. They don't want to hear you're big, I'm going to change the world. They want to hear that you have a real viable company.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that's not taking place is that there's nobody that educates the angel investors in terms of how to be one. So it's like they're naturally wired to only like, all right, does it meet this criteria? Check, 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 check. Okay, they're investable. Whereas, there should be some sort of education process in terms of this is where, this is the way that you need to think. Like, to be an angel investor, you have to have the mindset of, what if this does work? What if this does change the world? What if, and then, that's what you're betting on. Is there any educational components out there to help educate angel investors?
Yeah, that's the huge other side, right? It's really a marketplace. You've got the founders who need capital to create these opportunities that will better the world. And then you have the investors who are the check writers, and they can't exist without the other. And there is a real education gap on the angel side as well about how you even get started. There are organizations that they're starting to put out more material. There's the Angel Capital Association has Angel University, and I'm on the DEI committee there, and they're working hard to figure out how to bring education to a broader group of emerging angels to increase the diversity of who's getting into it. And there's some other programs coming out. Some venture funds actually have started their own angel groups that go with the education there. I'm part of one. So Vitalize VC has an angel group, Hustle Fund has an angel group, and it's starting to get out there more. But just because of the scale, the number of angels out there or potential angels, that's a big thing to tackle.
Have you, now that the markets are kind of resetting and there's not as much capital out there, have you experienced anything on your side in terms of now it's even more difficult to raise capital, or if you've not seen that yet?
So it's an interesting question, because I really focus on founders who traditionally have had a very challenging time raising capital always. This whole like, oh, it's downturning and, it's going to be such a difficult raise environment. Well, for us, it's always been a difficult raise environment. We're always being very capital efficient. This is kind of like normal operations for women and minority founders. So in that sense, yes, there's less dollars being put out into the market right now than there have been in a while. It's a more conservative investing environment. But primarily for funds, for VCs, angel activity is still very strong. And I have not seen a decrease in the angel activity, but it's also one that's very hard to measure because so much of it is not public data. So my view is a little biased in the angels that I know, and, in the world that I'm in. And just the last point on VC, we are seeing, again, as if it could get any lower, another decrease in dollars going to underrepresented founders, because whenever there's a downturn, VCs will revert back to more warm introductions, in-network, doubling down in their portfolio companies rather than investing in new companies. So we are seeing that, but at the early stage, I'm still as optimistic about opening up this, the sources of capital from outside of VC.
Have you always been a go-getter?
Have I always been a go-getter? Is that what you just asked?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why wouldn't you want to go get what you want?
I think there's plenty of people who don't. So were you like class president or something in high school growing up? Like, were you like the treasurer in middle school? So let me get to my deep question of this. Like, you started a medical tech company way back yonder that obviously you had to be a go-getter for. Then you see this huge problem, which you started Scroobious for. You have to be a go-getter for that. Like, how did you, like, is it an on-off switch? Like what makes you want to jump in and go after stuff like this? Because not a lot of people start a business, right? I mean, the entire country is based off of the employee mindset. So I don't think there are. I don't think there's a ton of go-getters, and I think the people that really are the ones that see success. So, but like, what makes you want to jump off the deep end and go after something? Because I think it's admirable, and most people don't want to do something that's difficult.
I appreciate it. Yeah, so I think if you are a founder or a person who can see room to do something that will help others. So if you really care about impact and mission and wanting to make the world a little bit of a better place in whatever way that you can, you have a more natural inclination to do more entrepreneurial things and to put yourself out there more. And particularly if you are a person who has experienced a type of inequity, you're even more so wanting to do something to make that a more equitable and enjoyable experience. So, my entry into entrepreneurship did come after that period of time where I was driven out of the workforce when I had a child. And so, I am now immediately passionate about how it allowed me to re-enter the workforce in a sustainable way that then became very powerful and impacted the rest of my career trajectory. So, I think my answer to that is just that, is some people have feel more fulfilled than others in seeing a type of injustice or a type of opportunity where they can actually do something about it, and needing to do it. I can't see that and not try to do something.
How do you teach that understanding? How do you educate? How do you have one child now?
I have two children.
Two. So how do you teach that mindset? How do you teach that lifestyle? How do you teach that grind to go after something like that to your kids without necessarily teaching them, start a business right now? Like, are there things that you can do to encourage them to get through kind of the gritty times and to go after something that you want?
I mean, part of it is just continuing to work, right? Is seeing, nothing teaches someone better than learning by example or seeing people in your life who are doing those things. Yeah. It's hard as a child, like your brain doesn't fully develop till you're 25, right? So like you're constantly learning.
I'm 38. I don't think it has yet.
I mean, I don't know you that well, but but just biologically, right? You're constantly coming into yourself until you're 25 years old, and then obviously you keep learning after. But it was very important for me, having gone through that, truly identity crisis, where I was home with babies and I had already had an educational and professional career. I'd already gotten my MBA, to sit there and say, what am I going to do? Because I don't know that I can just be an employee somewhere after this, what I just went through. I was very successful in that role and, wasn't allowed to stay in it. What happens? So, for me, for my children, I want them to see that their mother is following what she wants to do and what she is passionate about, and then she is helping other people in the way, right? Like, I'm living it. I'm doing the things that I'm talking about. That is the strongest way to teach that. And I do a lot of speaking at universities and organizations where I can be that female, and in particular mother voice of someone in a position of leadership for younger people to see. It's really important. There's another psychological principle that's called mere exposure, where just the number of times you see something impacts how normal you view it. So, right, like it's great that you intentionally did invite me on the show, and that you do have an eye toward making sure you invite guests who represent different demographics, because others need to see it. They need to see people being brought on as guests who are different than them, so that becomes more normalized.
Okay, so quick little thing of that. So I learned my work ethic from my mom when my mom and dad split up. And I didn't realize this until later in life, kind of like what you're saying. But she would work her normal job, and she had like 2 part-time jobs to keep her other 2 kids. So there's 3 of us to keep us afloat. And I mean, she was working basically 18, 19 hours a day to make it so that we would still be able to have, somewhat of a normal life, if you will. And so like, I look at that, I'm like, damn, like that's crazy that this lady did this for me. Like I need, like, that's like true love, It's like it's a nice thing. And obviously I've thanked her about that since, and it's just like, it's crazy to think that but you do kind of learn that work ethic from something like that. Another thing that's crazy, just from the guy to either the left or right of me and Tim, is that he's run every single day for like 7-8 years, at least 2 miles. Every single day, 2 miles. He started this streak. And about 4.5 years ago, I decided that I was going to do something very similar. And I use that in quotation marks because I have not run every single day from there. But I was going to work out or do something physical every single day. And I have for 4.5 straight years. And that's because I had seen him do it for 4 or 5 years before that. Yeah, it started that mirroring effect, or you see that enough, and you're like, oh, maybe I can do that type of thing. And I do think that probably has something to do with the thing where they say, surround yourself by the 5 people in your life is how well your life will be, or whatever that saying is, like
you are the average. Yeah.
The average of the 5 people around your life. Like, so if you surround yourself with a bunch of donkeys, your life is probably going to be, a donkey life. But if you fill it with a bunch of people, might be an ass. I didn't want to say it, but fill yourself with donkeys, you're going to be an ass. If you surround yourself with a bunch of people who are go-getters and are doing things that seem unbelievable, you might start to be doing some unbelievable things yourself. So
yeah, exactly. And you have to see people that look like you doing those things to feel that. Right. The other side of it is, if you only see people who don't look like you doing those things or around you, you think you can't. So it's both surrounding yourself with that type of person, but also making sure that there's people in there who look like you do. So, and I'm referencing obviously people who tend to be in circles where there aren't others who are, underrepresented. But that's why representation is so important, because you don't get that mirroring effect if you don't think that you can also do that thing.
Why do you think that people are not intentional in terms of with this? I mean, is it? Do you think that they're afraid? Do you think they don't know how? I mean, I don't know. I've learned a lot during this episode, just because in my head, I just feel like everybody should think the way that I think. And I never discount anybody. I accept everyone for who they are. We're very intentional on the show to make sure that we have a very diverse set of guests. Why do you think that people are not deliberate, with the way they do things?
I mean, isn't it like you're the king of like loaded questions?
Give him a hat. Give this kid a crown. Come on.
But no, I mean, because I don't feel like I can answer that question because, I would like to hear it from you so that we can, help amplify your voice in the sense of, hey, it's okay to be deliberate saying we want to have a boot camp with all female founders. That's totally cool. That's legit. I mean, so it's just like, why aren't people doing that? I don't understand.
I mean, again, it's not always ill will, right? It's not always purposeful that you're not including representation of others. Some of it is subconscious. So like there's some great research and work done by someone named Dana Kahns about promotion versus prevention questions. So she studied a ton of pitch meetings and evaluated the type of questions that investors would give to women versus the questions they would give to men, and found that there was a significant difference statistically that men were asked promotion questions like the upside, how big could this growth be, how strong could your sales be, and women were asked prevention questions, like, well, how can you ensure that this won't happen, or kind of the downside. The investors were not purposely doing that, right? It was subconscious, but it happened, and it influences how that founder is perceived and whether they are asked to continue on in the diligence process. So there are a lot of psychological factors at play in perpetuating bias and not being intentional where it is not, again, purposeful that someone's doing that. And then there are people who default to easy, like we were talking about before. If you tend to know people who are like you would have to go find other people who aren't. And that's harder to do than to just surround yourself with the people you already know.
How does the internet?
No,
Sorry.
Go ahead, Zach.
I'm just interested, like, how does the internet? Sorry, jeez. All right. Well, you're still laughing. Someone asked. So, how does the internet play into that? Like, does that make it better or worse?
In what way?
Well, so growing up, you didn't have access to all these things, so you couldn't see all these conversations happening. Are we at? Does social media, does the internet, does having access to all of this stuff make it better? Make it worse? Is it just the same? Like, where's the internet play in that role?
I mean, it's some of both, right? It's some of A and some of B.
I don't get to be the king of like loaded questions too. I mean, come on.
I already named a king. Prince? Or
I'll be your prince.
So, it is obviously way easier to find other people today than it was before because of the internet, right? You can expand your network in a way that would never have been possible, right? I managed to grow our company in a huge way entirely virtually. If the internet didn't exist, I don't think Scroobious would exist today when I started it right before COVID and quarantining. So in that sense, it allowed us and others to find our community. In our community right now, again, we've got over 300 founders, and I think the latest statistics are that it's 60% women and 70% non-white individuals. So we've managed to find our tribe, right? Our crowd. On the other hand, people will still feel more comfort or familiarity around those who are like them. And you see that heavily in social networks. So you still have to be intentional. Just because it's easier to find someone on the internet, where that wasn't an option before, you still have to intentionally find those people. And not everyone has the proclivity to do that.
Yeah, the point that I was making was the fact that people, they're called blind spots for a reason, and people have these blind spots. Just as you said, yeah, people aren't necessarily purposefully acting the way that they're acting, but it's just I want to help identify those blind spots that people may have, so that they can self-reflect and say, "Oh, wow, that's maybe that's totally me." So, not trying to set you up with loaded questions, but just really trying to shake some of the blind spots out of people so they can self-identify, so that they can make the change and take action for themselves,
Yeah.
because it has to be intentional.
Yeah, well, it's data, right? This is where if you don't track something, if you can't see the numbers behind something, you won't understand whether it's real or not. So for investors, it's very easy to say, "Oh, I'm not biased. I just invested in a woman, right? I can't be biased." But what if it's the only one? And
Right.
who are you taking meetings with? Right. So like I did a post a while back where I made just a simple spreadsheet to track that, right? Where you just put in, who did you meet with? What is their gender? What is their race? Did you take a second meeting? Did you take a third meeting? Did you invest? And just write them down so that you can evaluate your own behavior. Because if you don't track it, if you don't measure something, you won't change it. And you have to see it to believe it yourself. Right. So again, I talked about, on our own platform, we're building a dashboard for investors to say, hey, you engaged with pitches, or 90% of your pitches you engaged with are men. Then you take away the argument, because it's true. It happened. Right. But if you don't have the numbers, then you can easily say, oh, that's not true. Right. And again, not always ill will. You're not lying. But we're very good at justifying our own behavior so that we feel okay about ourselves. It's human nature. It's what we do. So you have to be confronted with data.
It's true. What do you do for fun?
I do like to have fun. I know this is a serious conversation, but anyone who knows me knows humor is a huge part. You have to enjoy what you're doing, and you have to laugh and have a good time, or else why are you doing anything? For fun, well, I mentioned I have 2 kids and a husband and a dog, so mostly family stuff, lots of kids sports and camps and all that good stuff that comes with elementary school. Gosh, I mean, between kids and family and a startup, these are the fun things.
Right. I always find that's probably the most difficult question that anybody asks me when what do I do for fun? That's just like, I don't know. Life is pretty fun. I'm doing this. If I wasn't doing the stuff I'm doing, I wouldn't be doing it, because then it's not fun. So
you could say you drive your Tesla.
Well, that's fun, sure, but like, I don't know what answer people are expecting me to say. I mean, it's just like, I don't know. But life is fun. You got to have fun in life.
Are you born and raised from Boston?
Yeah, I am. We're a Boston group.
What is it about Boston that is just so magical? Because that's a city that I'll never move to, but I would always want to move to, type of thing, right? I don't want to be I don't mind the cold, but I don't want to be that cold, type of thing. But that city, they seem to love I'm a big sports fan. They seem to love their sports. That's a big thing. Obviously, the Celtics just lost, which sucks.
Thanks for bringing that up. Thank you.
You're welcome. But it just seems like a place where people love sports, and it's so not every city is like that, right? People love the Boston area, the New England area for sports, and it's just, I don't know, there's something magical about that. What is it about Boston, when you're talking to people, that just makes you love it?
So it's funny. It is true. Boston is pretty unique, and there are some very not good parts about Boston, especially as it relates to diversity. We do not have a proud history there, or present a lot of the time. But it's interesting. I think that Boston itself has gone through so many challenges and overcome, the people of Boston, so many obstacles dating back to the founding days of our country, that we feel a bigger sense of cohesion and we don't take good things for granted, right? So like even the weather, it is a beautiful day here in Boston. It's 80 degrees. It's not humid. Everyone that lives here is outside and love it and in like the best mood ever, right? Like no one appreciates a good weather day like someone in Boston. And you don't get that if you always have good weather days, right? You have to go through the bad ones to really appreciate when there's a good one. And I think just as a community, we pride ourselves in overcoming tough things and really enjoying the good things.
Yeah.
But I mean, how many bad days do you have to have a good one?
How many bad days? I don't know the ratio. I haven't measured it. Maybe that's its own research experiment. But no, I just think, you know, any really strong community or geography tends to have a shared negative aspect as well. So you have that cohesion of the positive. And even right with sports, like we went through a pretty dark sport period and then it got awesome, right? And we all stuck through it. And so, you know, it just creates a tighter group.
Have you ever been to Six Flags New England?
As a child?
No.
Yes.
One of my favorite roller coasters in the I know that's a ridiculous question. So growing up, I used to ride roller coasters. Like I would travel the country and go to like different amusement parks. And so one of the ones was in Agawam, Massachusetts, which I think is like 30 minutes outside of Boston. And it's called Superman, or at least it used to be called Superman. And I rode that as a kid. And it was a really good one. Probably a top 5 roller coaster for me. There you go. Had to throw it out there.
Thank you for sharing for all the roller coaster enthusiasts.
That no one's listening.
Just trying to promote tourism to Boston. Boston is a special place.
Yeah, I mean, it's also just, there's so much history, you know, for anyone that like, there's no deeper roots, you know, it's just such a special place in our country.
Yeah, and specifically, and we talked a little bit before we went live, telling Zach after running Boston the last 2 years, I mean, running the Boston Marathon is something that I wish that every person could experience because it is unlike any running event, probably unlike any event, period. I mean, it's just truly, truly special.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I was, over the weekend, I was a judge for a final pitch competition for a Harvard program, for the Harvard Business Analytics program. And it's a certificate program that mainly happened during COVID. So people didn't get to go to campus like they, you know, would have normally. And like people came from everywhere, Australia, Dubai, all over the country, different, like all over the place. And the feeling, it was palpable how special that was. And it just like the marathon, right? For those of us that are here, I'm like, oh, I have to go to Cambridge today, you know, but you take for granted that people travel here from all over the world to visit these places and be in these historic spots. And it really is special.
I dig that.
Yeah, and as a Yankee fan, as a Bills fan, as someone from Buffalo, I mean, we're still going. Sports has been nothing but a dark time for us. We're waiting for our time.
Well, you'll appreciate. I went to college in Syracuse, New York, which is just about it's like the more colder, grayer spot. Like if I could go somewhere that was heavier on winter and darkness, that's what I did.
So is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to talk about?
I don't know. I think I just want to, you know, we got into a pretty heavy conversation, which, you know, is good. It was really important. But I also want to leave people with, you know, being an entrepreneur, while it's incredibly hard, is really exciting. Like there's no other thing. You create something in the world that didn't exist before. How cool is that? You know? And so, yes, like funding is an enormous challenge, especially for those who are underrepresented. Challenging anyway, but especially for us. And you're going to go through so many ups and downs, and every day you're going to be like, oh, should I just get a real job, right? Should I be an employee and not do this anymore? But I don't want to discourage anyone from getting into it if you really have that passion, because it's unlike anything else, and it's just such an exciting thing to do and way to contribute to progress in our society in a path that you really can't do any other way. I just wanted to end it happy.
Yeah, it was a great conversation, and it's one that needs to happen over and over and over and over again. I wish it wasn't such a long turn to get to where we need to be, but the more conversations like this, the better it's going to be, and the happier we'll all become.
Yeah, keep doing it. Keep having lots of different people on.
With that being said, if you are listening to the show and you want to be on the guest on the show, reach out to either Tim or myself or Allison, and she can bridge us hopefully together, and we'll make it happen. Thanks for listening. Download and subscribe. And Allison, thanks for your time. We will continue the conversation offline and maybe online again in the future.
Thanks,
Peace.
Allison.
Right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.